Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament Gospels, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And today we are looking at one of the most significant things that has happened. Probably, well, maybe number two, his resurrection would be number one, but is Jesus's death or Jesus's dying on the cross. And this is recorded in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to read from Mark's version. I like the little bit of the detail that he goes into here, but we will go through this. This is Mark 15, verses 33 through 41. It says, "At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried in a loud voice." And I'm not going to try to read that for you because I can't speak that. And it says, but basically what he says in our modern terms is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And this would have been a loud crying out. This wasn't a little whimper. This wasn't this was, at this point, God had separated himself from Jesus. And Jesus, in this moment, Jesus was alone. This was the thing that Jesus was most stressed out about, most fearful about, is, it wasn't, I mean, I'm not saying that, obviously the beatings, the whippings, the putting put on a cross, that was horrible, that was horrific. But that he could have got through, with I think little to not too much problems. It was this, this was the part you got to think about it. He was literally going through hell on the cross because God had separated himself from him, and that's what hell is separation from God. And so, he was all alone in this instance. He had taken all the sins of the world on top of him, on him, and now God had forsaken him or turned his back on him because God couldn't be in the presence of this and part of this. And so, this would have been a probably horrific crying out, that Jesus did here. And it says, when some of those who were standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling for Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, and put it on a staff, and ordered it and offered it to Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes and take him down. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. And then this is the things that just showed exactly who he was. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." And an interesting tidbit, and this is in a couple of the recordings, it says in verse 40 and 41, some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come with him to Jerusalem were also there. And so it's interesting how Mark made sure to mention all these, because we see a lot of the men who were following had scattered, but a lot of the women stayed. The women who were followers, they stayed. They were there with him the entire time, through his suffering and stuff like that. And I think that had to be a comforting, but it also shows the importance of women in the ministry of Jesus. And Luke always points stuff like that out, but Mark specifically points it out here. And I think we need to make sure we remember that and remember how important the women were also in the ministry of Jesus. We're going to talk about it a little bit more with his resurrection too. And so, in the notes with this, right, we don't know like how this darkness that happened occurred. We don't know. It could have been an eclipse. We're not 100% sure, but it's clear that God caused it, right? And it doesn't seem like it was expected, all right? And so these bystanders here, when Jesus cried out, they misinterpreted Jesus's words as that he was calling for Elijah, and when he was calling out to God, he was, because God wasn't there anymore, and he was he was screaming out in agony about, "Why if you had you forsaken me?" And so a lot of this was because Elijah had ascended into heaven without dying. They thought he would return, again to rescue them from some of this great trouble that they had. And even at the annual Passover meal, right, each family would set an extra place for Elijah in preparation for his return. And so it's interesting how they thought this about Elijah. And so the thing we see here with Christ's death, he this was a tremendous amount of suffering that he was going through. But once he finally died, um, and he cried out with, and more than likely his crying out and his last words were, "It is finished." And tomorrow we're going to look at, um, typically, in this case, in this instance, someone on the cross didn't die this quickly. They would typically have to go, and we're going to look at this tomorrow, and break their legs. But Jesus died pretty quickly from a crucifixion standpoint. And so one of the things we're going to look at is a lot of people have looked into, what happened, and we're going to look at that. And there's a lot of people think that he had a heart attack, that his heart actually gave out. And we'll look into that. And that's, when he cried out, "It is finished," that was part of, what was happening to him. He knew, and so, but we'll look at that a little bit tomorrow. But there was a loud crying out, and what happened after his death? There's 4 recorded miracles that happened after his death. The first one is darkness, right? Darkness came over the land at his death. The tearing of the curtain temple in two. And has significance because that was the separation between, into the holies of holies, and only the high priest and only at certain times was allowed together. And that temple, that curtain being ripped in two, was symbolic of that this age, that type of thing was over. And now Jesus, now we are the temples. The Holy Spirit's going to be in us. And so we don't have to go through a high priest or anything like that to talk to Jesus or ask for forgiveness or go through any process. That's all done away with. And so that was torn in two. There was an earthquake at the same time, and the people rose from the dead. And so there was people who they saw those who had rose from the dead. And so at his death, you see these 4 crazy things happening. And so you can see why the guard and the centurions and all these people were like, well, surely this man was the Son of God. And so Jesus' death didn't go unnoticed. Everyone at that point knew that something significant had happened. And we see reference to that. We there's outside references to this as well. And so this is the wonderful thing, is Jesus has now died on the cross. And I say wonderful thing. It's not wonderful. It's horrible that it had to happen. But for us, it's a good thing. And so he's given his life now on the cross. And so now we're going to look through the process of burial and the things that happened before his resurrection. And we'll continue those next week. We got about 2 weeks left now in this study, and then we'll reach the end of it. But this one here, this is the big thing, right? This is why Jesus came. And now we're going to see the resurrection, which is the most important thing, because if he hadn't resurrected, then none of this would have been worth anything. And so, as always, I appreciate everyone for watching. I appreciate those who've continued to follow along. As always, I've enjoyed this study, and I know we're getting close to the end of it, but I really do enjoy it. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, go ahead and do so. We're going to continue to do some different studies like this. Maybe take a little bit of a break here with some of the things that we do, but then we'll pick it back up and do some deeper studies. But as always, I appreciate everyone for watching.